Welcome to the Breaking Average podcast, the podcast designed to challenge you to break the mold that average has on the world. Each episode offers insights directly from those who choose to break average every day. Now for the latest insights, here are your hosts, Paul Gustafson and Barry Smith.
All right, joining me is Steve Finn, who is with Chestnut Mountain Ranch in West Virginia. Steve, good to see you. How are you, man?
Doing good. Hello from West Virginia.
Yeah, it's here we are. We're recording this here in kind of midwinter. How's the winter been so far in Morgantown? Just curious.
You know, we had winter around Christmas and then it just left and it hasn't come back yet. So at least we had a white Christmas, but everything else has been sunny and warm and dry. It's been a strange winter for us, but I'll take it because we've been able to get get ahead of a lot of construction goals that we had set for this year a little bit early.
Yeah, and I love, and we're going to get into it because people are probably wondering construction goals, what's going on. So let's kind of back up a little bit. Chestnut Mountain Ranch. If you just met somebody for the first time and it said, "Hey, what do you do?" and you shared a little bit about Chestnut Mountain Ranch, what would you tell that person in just a few seconds that you have, just to give it kind of high level?
Yeah, so Chestnut Mountain Ranch is a Christian home and school for boys. We focus on boys that are in the courts. They've been in the foster system. They may have been kicked out of school. They've hit some bumps. Often it's a bigger picture. It's a family issue, and we go after the whole picture. We take these kids in. They're often placed here through the courts or by a family, and we are focused on family reunification whenever possible. So that means we're not just dealing with a child, but we're dealing with the whole family, and we're peeling back generational issues that landed them here to begin with. So it gets pretty messy along the way.
Yeah, and I love what you do, but I think it's so important. I got to ask this question: what's the why behind it? What you do? Why do you do what you do?
I think we often in life go after things, maybe our own personal past wounds, and we tend to gravitate towards those people in need, a people group. And for my journey, my father died when I was 13, and man, that left a big wound right in the center of me through my teen years. And I was trying to figure life out. I was trying to fill that void with unhealthy choices. And when I was 20 years old, I got through those teen years by the grace of God. I got through them and got on the other side of them without a criminal record. And God protected me in a lot of situations. But I realized when I was 20 years old that I needed to turn things around, and I did. I was at the University of Georgia. I was in my second year of college, and I remember I just remember hitting my knees one night, going, "You know what? I've got to turn this around." And so I didn't know really where to start, but I found a local church. I got plugged in with a different people group, if you will, than I was running with previously, and there's a verse in Ephesians 2 that talks about how we are created for good works. And I wanted to figure that out. I was like, what am I created for? Why am I here? And I started this journey. And soon thereafter, I found myself being led to be attracted to law enforcement. And I'm not sure if it was going from running from the cops to being one, but I got into police work, and for the next 12 years, I was in Metro Atlanta and absolutely loved what I did. And so while I was there, I met my wife. We started a family. I got on a special unit that was we were in the middle of the fire often. We were going into high drug areas, high gang areas. I saw a lot of kids that were ending their life early or going to jail for the remainder of their youth. And just for what? For a stupid decision on a Friday night. And I thought, I don't know how to turn this around. And I started, I started doing a deep dive into those situations personally. I started looking at, there was a common denominator. Most of those kids, if not all of them, did not have a father figure at home. A lot of them didn't have a father or a mother at home. They were being raised by grandparents, or they were in the foster system, and they just gravitated towards unhealthy choices that had consequences. And so my wife and I started just what ifing. You have these what if conversations along your timeline in life, and our what if conversations started turning towards, what if we did more? What if we got involved with a program that was turning lives around? And we began looking. We found Eagle Ranch, or I would almost say Eagle Ranch found us, and that's a Christian children's home in North Georgia. We fell in love with the program, and we decided, hey, let's do a good thing for 3 years. And if there's nothing beyond this, then I'll go back to law enforcement. I had a federal law enforcement job lined up. That was going to be my next career step, if you will, and going up the ladder. And so we got into Eagle Ranch as house parents. We had 7 teenage boys in our care. These boys were tough because of my law enforcement background. They were the intake was the new kids coming into the program that were probably a little tougher than most were being shuffled into our house. And so we had a pretty wild 3-year ride at Eagle Ranch. But what we saw while we were there was a program that worked. I often saw these children when I was an officer in and out of the system being adjudicated for 4 to 6 months, and they were coming out. Nothing had really changed in their hearts. Nothing had changed in their home life. They were just being warehoused for a season, and they were right back at it. And so here was this private program that was turning lives around. And not only were we seeing this under our own roof, but we were seeing families being restored. And I paid attention. And so this what if conversation started again, because we're coming up, what's going to happen at the end of our 3-year commitment? We don't always want to be house parents. Where are we going to take this next step? And so my wife and I started talking about, let's take this model somewhere in the country where the need is the highest. And we started doing research. We started looking around the country. We started getting online when the boys would get out the door to school in the morning. Highest dropout rates, highest poverty rates, highest suicide rates, all these different statistics. And West Virginia just kept coming up to the top during this. And so it kind of came down to a point where my wife and I had to make a decision. And I said, let's go after this. Let's give this 12 months. If God's in it, he's in it. If he's not, he's not. We'll shut it down at 12-month mark. And but let's put our chips on the table and go after this.
Yeah. Was that a scary time for your wife, for Dawn? This is a big step of courage, a big step of faith. What was that like for you guys, just to kind of walk into the unknown?
Yeah. This takes an equally yoked movement. It's 100% on both sides. And, at first she responded, they've got troubled kids in Florida. Why don't we go there? And so I said, I don't think that's where we're supposed to go. And so she dug her heels in. And I remember there was this season where I just had to back off. I had to back off and just kind of put everything in a drawer for a season and get quiet. And she came back after a couple months and said, you know what, let's give this thing a shot. And it was a moment where it was like, okay, this is go time. And so we hadn't told anybody about this. We were keeping it just between the two of us. But at that point, when she said, I'm in step with you, let's go after this, And we started talking. We started talking to a handful of people. There were challenges right out of the gate, because most of these children's homes, if you research them, they're around the country. There's a lot in Florida. There's a lot in Georgia. They're in Virginia, the Carolinas, all the way over into Texas. It's not a new thing. It just never had come to West Virginia. But most of these are positioned around affluent areas, and they're in Naples, they're in West Palm, Jacksonville. There's about 5 around Atlanta. And the more research that we did, we found, most of their support was pretty much around a 40-mile radius around their program. And so we had some businessmen in Atlanta that we were initially talking to about, getting a business plan put together and a needs assessment and kind of doing our initial documents to move towards our 501c3. And some of these guys pulled me aside over a breakfast or a lunch, and they said, Steve, this thing's not going to get off the ground. I mean, how are you going to fundraise? What's your model? And I didn't even know what they were talking about at the time. I was a police officer that had a heart for kids, and I was stepping into a whole new realm. So the challenge of this learning curve was heavy. And I couldn't answer these guys. There was like, there's what we're looking at this. You can't sustain this. Even if you built something, you wouldn't be able to keep it open. The money is just not there. You're moving to one of the poorest states, if not the poorest state in the country. And it's just not going to happen. And so we backed off for a while, maybe a month or two. I started just kind of shrinking back a little bit. And I thought, yeah, maybe these guys are right. But there was this, I don't want to say a God prompt, but there was something that was just pushing me and my wife both to say, take this step of faith, trust me, and move. And so we decided to go after this in 2002. We didn't know anybody. We loaded up our U-Haul, and we essentially just drove off a cliff and moved to West Virginia.
With kids in tow too, right?
With 2 of them in tow. That's right.
Yeah. Wow. What a bold step of courage. And what's interesting, going back to where you started here, when you said 13 years old, you lost your dad.
That's right.
And tell me, let's go back to that for a moment. When you lost your dad, what happened to your world in that moment? What was that world like for you?
My father and I were close. He was a father that was a provider. He was a father that was a protector. He was a father that he chased purity in our lives. And he was a friend, and we were close, and we did a lot of things together. And so that when he passed away, I was angry at God. I was like, why did this have to happen? And also, my father would often talk about, he would tell me, he said, when I retire at 55, I want to do some good things for kids. I want to do some, and he didn't have a real clear vision, but he talked about helping children, and doing, starting some type of program. And that seed was planted way back then when I was 13, but it lay dormant for almost 10 years, 20 years, before things really started. I started remembering when I was at Eagle Ranch. I started remembering some of these conversations my father and I had. And my father died 18 months before he hit that retirement line of 55. And so I think another area that this impacted me was when I moved into my adult years. I didn't look at retirement like a lot of people look at retirement. There's like, what is retirement? It's a security net that is real for some, but some of us never get there. Like my father, he had all these aspirations to kind of cross this line and then do something good. But why not now?
Mhm.
And so that's what impacted me when I was moving. As I was moving into my adult years, I realized, this is the day. This is the day that you could impact somebody's life. This is the day that you could have that conversation. Don't wait. Don't put it off. And I think that again, some of our pains from our past and our wounds can greatly shape our future. And this is a case of exactly that, where my wounds and my losses from my past shaped who I was moving into my adult years. And now I wouldn't be where I am at now. We wouldn't be running a large children's home and a school had it not been for that storm in my life.
Yeah. And you've had a few storms. This isn't the only storm you've had, right? You've gone through, I know you and I have had multiple conversations over the years. You've gone through different storms at different times. And certainly with COVID and everything that's happened, we've gone through another storm. So describe it from your perspective for all of us, for all the folks listening to this podcast or watching. How do you see the storm right now? What's the storm in Morgantown? What do you see? What's happening? How are families being impacted right now?
Well, there's been a shift. Definitely there's been a shift. There's a lot of kids that are falling through the cracks. They're behind in school. There was a lot of virtual schooling going on that wasn't being probably monitored the way it should have been monitored. There's a lot of children that were being removed from their homes during that season, or maybe not and should have been. There was a shortage of workers. There was a shortage of attention to children. And so now that we're on the backside of all these lockdowns and these restrictions, and we're coming out of it, we're seeing a lot of kids that are just so far behind in school. Children that probably needed help 2 years ago are just now surfacing, and we're getting the phone calls, and our phones are ringing. I think we've had 23 calls for new boys in the last 7 weeks.
When you get those calls, because they're calling for hope, aren't they?
They're calling for help. They're calling for hope.
Yeah.
Usually it's a crisis situation.
So what do you tell somebody who's calling for hope and help like that?
Well, we tell them to come in for a tour, and we want to see them face to face. Even if we don't have a bed currently available, we want to make a connection with this family. Our beds are currently full. We've got a waiting list, but we've got an opportunity to touch these lives that are at a crossroads where I was at when I was a teenager. And we're going to try to stay connected with as many families as we can. Even if they can't get into the program right now, we've got an opportunity to communicate to these children, just like where I landed when I was 20 years old in Ephesians 2, that, hey, you were created for a purpose. There's a God that knows you by name, and you've got a future. And so sometimes words can turn a situation around, and those words can land deeper than we think. I mean, if you think about your past, and you think about maybe something a teacher said to you, or a coach, or I can remember a few weeks before my father died, one of his friends was over, and he pulled me aside for a second. And it's one of those moments that is just burned in my memory, in color, in stereo, in HD, and he said, uh, you need to keep your chin up. You're going to be the man of the house soon.
Mm.
And I thought, wow.
And you're the youngest kid in your family.
Right.
That's a big weight on your shoulder, isn't it?
It was a big weight. Yeah.
Do you still feel it a little bit when you go? I mean, that was years ago, Steve, and certainly you've had an impact, and I love the courage that you've walked and the path that you've taken. But do you still feel that sometimes?
Oh yeah. That it's there. I mean,
Do you feel the weight now? I mean, all these kids who want to come in, they're on a waiting list. How many boys do you have?
we have a capacity right now for 21 boys. We are about to break ground on the fourth. And again, we're doing everything debt free. So we just raised the money for the fourth boys home, and we're going to be breaking ground on that as soon as we know this winter is over with. And we'll have it under roof by the end of the year, but pretty soon we'll have a capacity for 28 children.
28 boys.
Yeah.
Ages from 7 to 19, right? I forget the age.
Most of them come in around 11 years old
11.
and as late as 16, but we've got some children that have been with us for almost 5 years now. The average stay is about 2 years, and we see these children going home and things are at a place where they can graduate the program. They're doing well, their family's doing well, and we have a big celebration and a graduation ceremony for these children to go back home and kind of re-enter the public school or wherever they left off. But some of our children here, things don't come together, and so they're growing up here. So once in a while we have children they'll be with us till 17, 18, 19, whatever it takes. My wife and I just adopted a child that he needed adopted. I mean, long story short, he needed a place to be. He needed a place to call home. He needed. He never had that. He was in and out of the foster system, and he just couldn't land anywhere. And so 3 years ago, we decided to be that for him, and we gave him a loving home. And so he's still with us. He's about to turn 19 next week, and he's doing great. He just graduated high school, and so every child's journey is different, but they tend to share common denominators.
Yeah. Yeah. Do they? So one of the things that I've been focusing on over the last couple of years is the limits that we put on ourselves, right? Our imagination, I call it the most powerful tool we have. It's a muscle. And it's one that either lifts us or limits us. And as a young boy going 13, losing your dad, I'm not sure what was flying through your mind in terms of your imagination, but feeling that weight of the world and seeing this big hole that's there and the struggles and the challenges that kids, especially now with COVID and everything else. Mm-hmm. So the limits have never seemed greater. And you've got a great book called Seed the Vision. I think it's called, Seed the Vision. And you've been talking about casting that vision. Mm-hmm. What do you do to cast new vision into that young person whose imagination has taken them into places that are pretty dark, and they don't have that hope, they don't see that future, but you cast that vision for them? What's your, share with us? I mean, maybe there's something here for all of us that we can use to lift somebody else up.
Yeah, I think that it's a journey with these kids. When I say they're here for 2 to 3 years, it often takes that long to have that final conversation of where they have a vision for their own life, but they've got to get past their wounds. They've got to get past their storms. They've got to get past the issues the cards that have been dealt to them. And so now they're around a new group of people. They're living here on the property with house parents. We've got an accredited school on the property. We have counselors that work with the family. We've got administrative staff, but we're all working together and we're all singing the same song. And these children, they're going to keep us at arm's length for a season, every one of them. Some of these kids have been through 5, 6 foster homes by the time they get to us, and they're expecting us to be just the next adults in their life that are going to feed them, put them up for a season, and then move them on. And it takes a while for them to realize, okay, maybe there's something different here. And it goes back to what John Maxwell says: people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And for these children to know that we care about them, it takes time.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember one child that we had here I think he was here for about 4 years, but man, he was wild. He had been carried out of his 4th grade classroom in handcuffs before we got him. We had to call the police out here a couple times for his behavior and some of the destruction to property that he created. And he just kept testing us, testing the boundaries, trying to get kicked out. And then he turned it around. Like there was a point where the light bulb went off and he started soaring. And right now he is assigned in the U.S. Army. He's assigned over at Arlington to a special unit for he does the 21 gun salute. He shoots the cannons off over at Arlington. And he is a man's man right now. He's got his own car. He's living a very, very good life. And I've asked him, I said, when did it turn around for you? Like, when did you realize that you had a purpose and you had a vision for your own life and that we did care about you? And it was interesting. He said it was on a trout stream one day. He said, you guys had me on a fishing trip that I should have never been on. He said, I didn't deserve to be on it. And we caught some of the biggest fish that day. And he said, I realized in that moment how much you guys cared about me. And he goes, you guys had done this 20 times before, but he goes, for some reason, I realized it. It became real. And I started paying attention. And so, you with these children, it's not a 4 to 6 month fix. You've got to put on your patience. You've got to put on your grace. And you certainly have to carry with you a lot of love into every workday, because it's going to take a journey to get to that point.
Yeah, I love that story. And I know there's other similar stories with some of the boys that you've had. And you said something earlier that really resonates with what you just shared. You said, this is the day you can impact someone else's life. And for those watching or listening, take hold of that, because there may be somebody in your life, maybe close to you, maybe in your family, maybe a friend, maybe somebody you know, who they've struggle. And you just like, we're not seeing anything. Well, hang in there. Keep going. Keep going. Maybe today is that one day where something's going to happen. Like Steve said, this is the day you can impact someone else's life. Maybe today's that day. Mm-hmm. So just keep going. And I've seen you do this. I've seen, I know a little bit of the backstory. I know the hurdles that you and your wife and your team have had to go through. And now you're about to start ground on the next Boys Hood home, 28 boys. And look back now, Steve. Tell me, did you imagine this? Is this what you imagined, or is it greater than what you imagined?
It's greater. And it's so early on, before we even had property, we put together a vision brochure, and the original vision was for some type of campus on acreage. But in that campus, we had envisioned 7 homes, a school, counseling center, and I had a model to follow. I mean, there's other children's homes out there that have similar footprints. And so we put together this vision brochure, a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And I remember early on, I put some years around it, but I as we went to another edition of that vision casting brochure, I took the years off of it because I wasn't really, we weren't,
Mm-hmm.
Our journey did not match Eagle Ranch's.
Yeah.
Their cash flow early on was much higher. We have a golf event in West Virginia, and we might bring in $12,000, and they might be bringing in six figures. So I learned early on, okay, this is a different journey. This is going to be a completely different journey, and I've got to rest in that and not try to rest in somebody else's successes and journey. This is going to be our mountain to climb. And but we held to the vision. We held to the vision that one day we're going to have 7 homes on this property, 49 boys living here. We're going to have a school that's built for 50 children. We're going to have a beautiful counseling center. We're going to have a chapel. We're going to have staff housing, a gymnasium one day, and so we've held to that, and we have seen that playbook coming together. But what I didn't expect was that we might have the opportunity to impact the rest of the state one day. And we are starting to see that unfold, because over the last few years, the foster numbers and statistics in West Virginia have doubled, mostly due to the opioid epidemic. A lot of adults that you have this whole generation with the fentanyl and the opioids are devastating to families. You've got these adults that are dying. You've got these adults that are going to jail or just disappearing. And so you've got this huge number of grandparents and great grandparents and aunts and uncles picking up the pieces of these adults' decisions, and that often looks like raising children. Mm-hmm. And so the system is just overloaded, and we have been able to come to the table with a vision to help fill the numbers, the need for foster families within West Virginia. And so about a year ago, we hired a director of foster care, and we have been rolling out a new model that I believe is going to change the entire state. And so you're going back to your question of, is this bigger than you ever thought? Absolutely.
Yeah, it's more than the 49, the vision, and the vision for 49, I'm sure, is still there, but this is greater than the 49. This is statewide, and it's probably crossing borders. It's probably crossing borders, which is amazing.
It is, because we next weekend we're actually part of a large launch in Ohio, and you and I talked about that earlier. But we're going to be part of that next weekend, and they had to stop their registration. They've got a lot of pastors and churches coming to this event, and they're already booked. So
wow,
we've got speakers coming in from all over the country, national speakers that are specialists in the whole realm of foster care and these children that are in the system, and we're pretty excited to see what we might be able to do, just 3 hours away over in Ohio.
That's amazing. It started, guys, as you're watching, listening to this and hearing Steve, it started with you standing in the gap. And maybe it's a scary gap. I would imagine it must have been for Dawn and you too. I mean, but you went back, you had that seed of vision that was planted by your dad before he passed, wanting to make an impact. You wanted to do that. As you hit 20, you realized, I remember that. So you have that empathy for others. But it started with you standing in the gap. And when you stand in the gap, I feel like God does something with that. and makes an impact. And it's back to your, I think, was it Ephesians message that you shared, the
Yeah,
quote?
Ephesians 2, I believe it's 8, 9, and 10.
We're created for good works.
That's
We're
right.
created for good work. So if we look for those gaps that need to be filled, we step into those gaps, as scary as it is, not knowing all the steps. Steve, you didn't know all the steps. I mean, you knew some stuff, but there was a lot you.
Oh, I still don't know all the steps.
Yeah. And here's what's interesting. You pulled the dates off some of these things, and that was probably the right step. I read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Have you ever read that book?
I haven't.
And he's a Holocaust survivor during World War II, in the concentration camps. And he talks about this difference between naive hope and real hope. And naive hope is when somebody kind of puts a date on, they have hope and that's good, but then they put a date on it, like an expectation that this is when it's going to happen. And when it doesn't happen, that hope actually turns into doubt.
Mm-hmm.
It starts to make them think, oh, God's not with me, or, it's never going to happen. And they lose hope. And so when you peel away the date, like, well, don't put a date deadline on hope. God answers it in his way, right?
That's right.
Then you start to see, okay, now I can just look to see how God's going to provide in this season, despite the challenges that I have. And it unfolds, and we start to see that. So, and he calls that real hope. So, I know you're a big Maxwell fan. Leadership, you've already quoted it. You've been down there. You visited with John a few times. Brought the boys down there on a field trip.
We need to do that again soon.
Yeah. So, give me your biggest leadership takeaway from John Maxwell.
Well,
I'm putting you on the spot. I know.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at all his books up here on my shelf.
Well, let's start with that. What's your favorite Maxwell book?
I would probably say No Limits.
Oh yeah, it's a good book.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think, and I don't know if this is an actual quote, but it's a premise of teaching within his, like, we all need to start somewhere. We have visions, we have dreams and aspirations for our life. Sometimes, and this wasn't in his book, but sometimes the most dangerous thing in our house is our easy chair, because we can get into this rut of 9 to 5, and we get into our easy chair, and we need to get out of that cycle, because those weeks turn into months and years, and before we know it, we've wasted a lot of valuable time where we could be impacting the lives of others. So start somewhere, and to that, I was in that rut even as an officer. I can remember early on, and my wife and I, we went to church one Sunday. I was probably half asleep because I worked late the night before, and this lady got up on stage, and she was giving the morning announcements. There's going to be a cookout. There's going to be there's this event going on at the church, and this and that. And then in the middle of that, she said, and we need help in the nursery. Well, I didn't even hear it, but my wife elbowed me, and I said, "What?" And she goes, "Let's do that." And I said, "Do what?" And she said, let's go help in the nursery. And I said, "Yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm the 6'5" cop. I'm not going to go down and change diapers and wipe noses." And she said, "Well, why not?" And I was like, so we're like having this like whispering domestic dispute in the church pew. And I thought, you know what, I'm not, sometimes the Holy Spirit wears a dress. I probably should just give in to this one. I said, all right, let's do it. And so we signed up, and for 2 years we worked downstairs once a month with kids. And I changed diapers, I wiped snotty noses, I held screaming babies, and but we were serving a need in our
Yeah.
church, and it was those baby steps in the early days that helped me kind of start putting on different lenses to life.
Yeah.
I started seeing things just a little bit different, and it was those baby steps in the early days where um, people say, "How did you build this children's home and books and you're getting national attention in different circles?" And I said, "Man, it started decades ago at the nursery downstairs in our church."
Mm.
And we need to start somewhere. Each one of us, don't go for the big thing, just start somewhere, because there are people in need in our own community, and God will start, as you start moving and you start getting involved in the lives of others, and you're not really sure where the fog will start to lift, and you'll find yourself being your true north will start coming into focus, and you're going to realize, man, I might need to be working with the elderly, or I might need to be serving veterans, or I might be need to work for a children's home. People always ask me, how come you don't have a girls' ranch? Well, that might be somebody else's calling. That's a totally different ministry right there. There's so many opportunities to serve others, but we need to start somewhere.
I love this. Serve the need, guys. So as you hear what Steve is sharing, look for that. Serve the need. And it may start small, maybe changing diapers initially, but eventually you get to move in mountains. And Steve, I know, again, a little bit of your story. You are on a mountain, and the ranch is called Chestnut Mountain Ranch. What's the name of the mountain?
Well, we're actually this is part of the Chestnut Mountain Range, but I did not know that when we had bought this property. So we had already grabbed the name Chestnut Mountain Ranch for our 501c3, and it just so happened that the property that we bought was part of the Chestnut Mountain Range. So
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, this has been awesome. Appreciate you just jumping on this. How can people reach out to you, support you? What's the best way?
Our website, cmrwv.org.
cmrwv.org.
Yeah, or Chestnut Mountain Ranch on Facebook.
Yeah.
Our contact information is out there. They can find us. We need help. We're looking for house parents right now. We utilize a lot of mission teams to help us keep our building costs down and to help keep that next vision step moving forward. We've got a group of Boy Scouts out here right now doing an Eagle Scout project.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways to jump in and
yeah. And I've served, I've gone out there and helped out as a team, helping out one of the early buildings. I think it was the second building. Helped kind of lay down the rebarb on that. That was fun. So I love what you're doing, Steve. Definitely, I'm going to encourage everybody to reach out. He's got 2 books, Seed the Vision, and the other one is Ranch Boys. That's the latest and greatest. And both are great reads. And Steve is definitely somebody you want to keep close, keep an eye on him, continue to support him and encourage him. But be encouraged by this. Stand in the gap. Look for those needs that are out there. Serve. When you serve, you're doing something significant, and that's greater than just finding success. So,
that's right.
Yeah. Steve, any final thoughts as we close this down?
No, I would just encourage anybody listening out there to pray about what the rest of their days should look like. Yeah. Don't focus on that retirement finish line, but begin to put on a new set of lenses and begin to focus on the needs that are around them, the impact that they can make in their own circle. It's all around us. We don't have to travel to another country. We don't have to travel to another state. Often those needs
they're right here.
Are right here.
They're right here. I love that. It's a good thought. Thanks again, Steve. And I will stay in touch with you. So appreciate you being on this.
Good to see you again, Paul.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Breaking Average podcast. If you loved what you heard, please take a moment to subscribe. This show was produced by R Squared Multimedia. All opinions and comments expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and do not reflect the opinions or views of any of the advertisers, producers, or platforms. As you continue your day, what is one action that you can apply from this podcast to your life? Tune in for our next episode as we continue to challenge everyone to break average.